Hi everybody. This video is about the American political parties, and we'll talk mostly about the two major political parties at the moment, although we will talk a little bit about third parties very briefly. The two major political parties right now are the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. They've both been in existence since the 1800s, the Democrats since the 1820s, and the Republicans since the 1850s. And they've got little symbols associated with them, as you can see on the screen, the blue donkey for the Democrats and then the red elephant for the Republicans. And the little characterizations were actually given as a joke, and not a nice one either. The Republicans were depicted in a political cartoon as elephants and the Democrats as donkeys. The idea was that elephants are, back in the day, we thought they were not very smart, okay? And also, they are immovable. Well, that's still true. If you want an elephant to move and it doesn't want to move, you're not going to be able to move it because you can push all day long and that elephant's not going anywhere. So it was designed to indicate that the Republican Party wasn't willing to move on issues. The Democratic symbol of the donkey, I think that's pretty clear what the insinuation is there. But both of the parties decided, you know what, let's own it. And so they embraced those political cartoon symbols. And Republicans said, hey, you know what, elephants actually are smart and they take care of their own. And the Democrats said, you know what, donkeys are powerful and they care for everybody in the barnyard. If you've ever been kicked by a donkey, you'll know how powerful they are. And so they decided to make it their own, and they've kept those associations. Now, the colors are something that was done actually unintentionally. It was not created with the purpose of assigning red for Republicans and blue for Democrats. But this was done because of changes in technology. So before the 2000 election, the only option you had for getting the news on election night or getting updates, because a lot of times elections don't have a winner that night. You have to wait several days, like for the final ballots to be counted. But the only option to get that news was on TV. And that now, of course, you can, check your phone. But back, say, like in the 80s, you had ABC, NBC, and CBS, and those were your only options. And if you flipped from channel to channel, then you would have to look at the key in the bottom of the screen to see which candidate or party was represented by which color, because they were just randomly assigned. At one point, yellow and green were very popular colors for candidates to be assigned by networks, and that was because people still had black and white TVs, and this way you could actually make a differentiation in the shades of gray that would come through. So in 2000, the networks all got together and they said, well, let's at least make it easy on the viewers when you flip channels. And so they just randomly assigned red for the Republican candidate, blue for the Democratic candidate. And it stuck. That way the public was able to consistently, if you move from channel to channel or if you look at a different website, you know who's ahead in which state or who has won which state or which particular race. So why do we have two political parties, and why specifically do we have a Republican and a Democratic Party? Let's talk about it. So we've not always had the Republicans and Democrats, obviously. Back in the early days after the Constitution was created and implemented, the Federalists were the only party around, and that was just for a few minutes. The Federalists were the party of George Washington and the other founding fathers who helped create the Constitution and get that implemented. And so early on in the days of the Republic, Thomas Jefferson thought, having a political party is fine, but it's problematic to have only one political party. You see that now in places like North Korea, not a good example to go down. And so he created his own political party. And this was really, really extraordinary because he was a member of President Washington's cabinet, and President Washington was a Federalist. He was the chief Federalist. So that was something pretty amazing. Imagine now, a Democratic president having a Republican member in the cabinet, or a Republican president having a Democrat in the cabinet. Pretty extraordinary. So he created his own political party called the Democratic Republicans. And that is not they are not tied to the current Democratic Party or the current Republican Party, although both major parties are fond of claiming the Democratic Republican Party of Jefferson as their original roots. The issues have changed vastly, way too significantly to really effectively make that comparison. So this gave a little bit of competition in elections for the first time and really helped inculcate that two-party system that has been dominant in American politics since really the first days of the Republic. So we got that tradition, but the two-party system was also created by accident. When the founders created the Constitution, when they wrote out the Constitution, they wrote out a winner-take-all system in American elections. And that means that if you win the election, cool, you've won whatever position that is. If you come in second place in an election, you go home. There is no prize. And so that means that it is very hard for third parties to compete in this winner-take-all style of system. And so while third parties do exist, and I'll talk about them in a different video, it is extremely challenging for them to make inroads once you've got two established major parties. Now, third parties do occasionally overturn or become a major party. The last time that happened, though, was in the 1860s, 1856 to 1860, with the current-day Republican Party. So it's been, a century and a half ago. So it's been a minute. Can it be done? Yes. Is it likely to be done? Now it's very, very challenging for a third party to make that inroads. What you're more likely to see in the current system are party realignments. Now, a party realignment is a curious political event. It requires a few steps in order to make a significant change. What happens is, ideologically, you've got one party ideologically on the left and one party ideologically on the right. With a party realignment, what they do is take little steps and eventually they switch ideologies. And this is really, really something that can be challenging to grasp. If you think about it in the sense of the last time we had a party realignment, this was back from the 40s to the 60s. If you know somebody from a southern state who is older, white, very conservative in their ideals, but they identify as a Democrat, that is extremely likely because of the last party realignment that we had. Back prior to the 1940s, the Republican Party was the Liberal Party, the Democratic Party was the Conservative Party, and dominated the South. And so a number of changes occurred, specifically the Civil Rights Movement, and we saw a shift to where the Democratic Party is now the Liberal Party and the Republican Party is now the Conservative Party. So the parties change. The people don't necessarily change their political views, which makes a lot of sense if you think about it. They don't change their political identification because it's something that is part and parcel of you. If, for example, you couldn't cheer for Clemson for whatever reason, that doesn't mean that you're going to be all Roll Tide, okay? It takes a lot to change your personal identification. And so you still see a lot of elderly white folks who are conservative, but they self-identify as Democrats in the South. And that's because of this party realignment. What's required for a party realignment are a few steps. You have to have some kind of division, okay? Some kind of powerful event has to occur that causes deep divisions between the two parties. And that division back in the 40s, the last time we had a realignment, it took about 20 years, realignments take a while, was the Civil Rights Movement. And so that division, the Democratic Party, seeking votes in the South, wanting to make inroads there, decided to embrace the Civil Rights Movement. The Republican Party decided that they wanted to not support the Civil Rights Movement, and each were seeking different groups of voters in this division. And so what you have next in a party realignment is an election where you see enduring change in coalitions. And that means that you've got groups, different demographics of people who tend to switch their vote ultimately and become a member of the other party. They may vote consistently for the Democrats that I talked about earlier, the old white Southern Democrats, may still say they're Democrats, but very often they vote consistently for Republicans. Okay, so that change creates an enduring change in coalitions, and that sets up the two-party system for stability. It sounds weird because you're making a lot of changes across the ideological spectrum, but that two-party system is staying even sturdier because the two parties are still in competition with one another. You can't have just one party, not possible. And so the partisan realignments sometimes take place. There are several discussed in your book, and they are really neat. I get asked a lot, are we in a partisan realignment now? Probably not, although we are in some interesting partisan changes, particularly in the last decade, and we'll see what changes happen in the next one.